This morning we're going to be talking about Isaiah chapter 58. We're going through more verses on fasting and trying to discover and unfold some things that maybe we did not know, or rehearse some things that we did to kind of remind ourselves that we need to be in prayer and fasting, and we need to live a fasted life, and as the Holy Spirit leads us to. And we discovered last week that it really is a daily question before the Lord. What is it you want from me today, Lord? And then it's also a question of ourselves to be able to say, I want to give this to God today. I'm going to skip this meal, or I'm going to do without buying that certain thing so that I can help another person, or whatever kind of thing that he's leading you to do. It'll come up from your heart, and then also as you're asking him, he'll direct you. So there's a couple different ways that he leads us into prayer and fasting. We've gone over Isaiah 58 before, and in the weeks to come, as we do more talking about fasting, I'm going to go over different types of fast, or this was the reason that they fasted is more so what I'll be dealing with. Because there are types of fasts where you go to break a bondage. And there's a type of fast that is there in repentance or change of heart. There's different types of things, different reasons that we fast. And we'll be going over that in the future. But I felt to go back to Isaiah 58 this morning and going over that chapter. The beginning part, we've talked about how fasting can be done, but it can be done religiously or it can be done with the wrong attitude. We all already had talked about how it can become, like the Amplified says, a mechanical thing. All through the beginning parts of that chapter, it talks about fasting in a way that, they did it with a certain attitude. Like, hey, why ain't I getting what I'm asking God for? I mean, I am fasting. I like verse 2. It says, yet they seek and inquire and require me daily and delight externally, is what the Amplified says, to know my ways. And so just using the word externally there, we're putting on a fast, we're letting people know that we're doing this, and we're really showing people externally that, hey, I'm fasting, so God's got to do something. I'm expecting something of him, and we'll many times do that. They are saying they want to know his ways, and if they were in reality a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God, they ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God in visible ways, and so they really want to be seen. And I don't believe that you have to lurk about, and hide out if you're fasting. I can't let everybody know I'm fasting kind of thing. There's nothing wrong with just, no, I'll pass on the cookies. I'm fasting right now. It's usually not the person who says that, if that's all that's said, that's a problem. But many times if you use that term, if you just say I'm fasting right now, it does get other people in a wad. Have you ever noticed that? Especially like at Christmas time or something like, oh, right now you're fasting? Are you sure? You want me to send some of these cookies home with you? It's like people feel there's like a compelling thing that feels bad for you. And so that many times is why we dodge that bullet, because it's, first of all, we don't want to go around, we're bragging that, and we want to be visible that we're fasting. But sometimes you have to literally say, because there's no way out of the situation, you have to say, I'm fasting, and I'm not able to do that right now. Or you can use a different term that might lighten that some. I'm doing without that right now. But you don't have to say you're fasting, and it still will get people where they feel the need to feed you. I don't know why, but it's just like they're bothered. It's, if it'd be like saying, I just feel like doing without a coat today, and everybody's afraid you're going to freeze. Well, we've got to get them help. We must get blankets. There's something they have to have it. I'm not sure what all causes that, but so when we go and we look externally, or we are trying to show people that we're fasting externally, our attitude is wrong to begin with. We have to say it, then we have to say it. But there's just a difference between, like, look at me, I'm doing this. And it's been 20 days already that I've gone without. The voice tone changes and different things like that. And that's kind of, between the word externally, and then he talks about on the outward, how the Amplified says it. It's invisible ways. that they may want to make sure people see what's going on. This is a wrong attitude. Why have we fasted, they say? Why are we even doing this? And you don't even see it. Verse 3. Why have we afflicted ourselves, and you take up knowledge of it? Behold, O Israel, on the day of your fast, when you should be grieving for your sins, you find profit in your businesses. And instead of stopping all work, as the law implies you and your workmen should do, you extort from your hired servants a full amount of labor. So when they were to do without work, which would have been like, hey, we're fasting, everything shuts down. They still were doing that on the side. They would make their servants and stuff do it because they wanted to make sure they're still making money. But yet they had that outside thing of, I really want people to know that I'm holy and I'm fasting. God does not want that. He doesn't want that for us. There's a whole different reason for fasting. Verse 4 said, the facts are that you fast only for strife and debate and to smite with the fist of wickedness. Fasting as you do today will not cause your voice to be heard on high. And that verse makes me pay attention. Yeah. Because if it says it will not cause your voice to be heard on high, then my brain automatically goes, well, what will cause my voice to be heard on high? If that's not going to do it, then what will do it? And so the next parts of the verses we pay attention to real strongly. Verse 5, is such a fast as yours what I have chosen? Is this how I've laid it out? A day for a man to humble himself with sorrow in his soul? Is true fasting merely mechanical? Is it only to bow down his head like a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him to indicate a condition of heart that he does not have? I like how the Amplified says that. So you can put that all on the outside, kind of saying, this is my heart, when really on the inside, that's not how your heart is. But it's a pretty good show. Will you call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? So he's asking, like, hey, you serious? That's what you're going to call fasting? And then we're going to go to what I really want to talk about this morning. Rather is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bonds of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every enslaving yoke? Is it not to divide your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked that you cover him, and that you hide not yourselves from the needs of your own flesh and blood? So before we go any further, we're going to take that apart. The number one thing that fasting should have in it is not just that you're doing without, but as you're doing without, we're communing with God in a different way. We've set ourselves to the side and saying, I'm your vessel. Use me. So part of fasting, where you're just sitting in sackcloth, and I'm fasting, and I'm hoping God will notice that I'm just so downtrodden, you're not really doing anything for anybody else. There isn't any of the Spirit of God flowing through you. It's all about you. And to be changed, to be in that spot where he is able to change us, it's automatic that when we get in the presence of God, remember I said prayer is communion with God. Fasting is setting yourself aside for communion with God. So it's that preparation. You cannot get in the presence of God and commune without the love of God coming on you for other people. So that really is one of the signs that something's coming out of your heart that's good. And it comes from God. And many times when we're without that, you can do helps, like especially at this time of year with Christmas and everything. You can do that very religiously. Every year, we always give $30 to feed the hungry, or whatever it is. It can be a very religious way of doing that. But when we set ourselves aside and we've gone in communion with God and we're looking to Him, He will then that love will begin to flow through us, where we can feel a heart change. And we're looking for not only our heart to change in these next steps that I'll be laying out, but that we also bring that change to other people. Because we can't take them where we haven't gone, right? We can't give them what we don't have. So as soon as we go there, we begin to have something that we can give. We begin to have gone somewhere where we can take them. And so the first part of verse 6 says, loose the bonds of wickedness. Now, a bond has many different meanings, but the main one there is something that binds or restrains, like a fetter, to prevent someone from moving. Now, isn't that interesting how wickedness will come upon our heart, it'll come upon our mind, it'll come upon individuals, and it will prevent you from moving. It'll prevent you from being able to move ahead. And, this is why, when you're in jail, then somebody has to place bond for you. They've got to be able to, what they're trying to do is get you out of a restraint, even if it's temporarily. We've got to get you out of there for this little bit of time because you're in lockup. God is wanting us in prayer and fasting to be looking at that and saying, how, wherever wickedness has touched my life, wherever it's caused me or prevented me from moving, I want that gone. I want that gone. It's got to go in the name of Jesus. And as that freedom comes on us, and as we're in that communion with God and we're fasting and we're putting an emphasis on it, the power of God flows through us, begins to set us free. And guess what happens? It affects everything around us because we're free men and women. And we may be walking by people who are prevented from moving, and we're on the move, and they can see us that we're moving, and they're stuck in a bond of wickedness. And they'll see that in us and go, hey, how did you get free? How'd you get free? See, this is why we have to have this in revival. We'll be talking about revival this morning. You can't present revival religiously. Hey, this is what you should do, and you should go do this, and you should do that. When the power of God's flowing through you, it causes the person's eyes to come open, and there's a great awakening that they may look at you and go, you're free, and somehow I'm prevented from moving. How'd you do that? It makes witnessing opportunities just huge all over the place. So the first thing that it should affect really is that we're loose from the restraint. I'm not restrained anymore. Whatever the situation is, my heart has the freedom to move ahead. And then it says to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every enslaving yoke. I'm gonna jump down to the verse 7. It says, is it not to divide your bread with the hungry? I'll name all the different things that it talked about in verse 6, but the second thing I want to share is sharing your bread. It will cause you to share. Now, bread indicates also the word. We don't live on human bread alone, right? But at the same time, give us this day our daily bread. When you look that up in the Lord's Prayer, it doesn't just mean physical bread. It is the bread of the word that comes forth to us. And so it's going to cause you to share your bread. Both physical and spiritual bread is going to go forth. So once again, it sounds a little bit like evangelism, doesn't it? There's something about fasting that causes evangelism. First, it has to evangelize our own heart, because now we're in communion with God. And guess what? There is no bonds of wickedness on God. So when we're in communion with him, when we set that time aside where we're like, I got to get close to him, and we press into where he's at, he evangelizes us. Yeah. We get saved all over again in so many areas. Wherever there's wickedness, salvation means to take the limit off. Bonds mean to prevent you from moving. So there's a limit there. So we get close and we push in close to God, he will literally start taking limits off that were there before, that wickedness had set up. And he evangelizes our heart. And whenever our heart is allowed to be evangelized, we will turn around and evangelize someone else. It's just the way it is. Now, what's scary about that is if we say, well, why isn't there evangelistic stuff going on in the church? Why aren't people getting saved left and right? Where's the prayer and fasting? How much has our own heart been evangelized? Because religion says, well, I got saved in 8th grade. I remember that. That's when I got evangelized. I pray to God he evangelizes my heart every day. Every day I need to be saved in a new way. Every day. That's why I'm able to go and evangelize somebody else out of what he's evangelized me in. If I stop that, then anything I try to do to bring people to Christ will be a program. That's where programs come in the church. Hey, maybe we should have a party and invite some people in. That'll get them. That'll get their heart and knowledge of God. Well, it might, but there's a really good chance that it might not. Unless our hearts have been evangelized, it doesn't matter what event we plan. The fruit's not going to be there. because the power of God flows through us. As we've been evangelized, we will evangelize others. So it'll cause you to share your bread. The third thing is it says that we will bring the homeless or the poor into our house. And so what that will cause is our heart will be evangelized in such a way where we want to bring them in. We can't stop ourselves. There's such a love coming through that it's like, God, we need this. We need to be able to bring them in and meet their needs because we've been evangelized. There's something that happens in church when we don't have fasting. There's a pride that comes in that if I said, well, I know some poor people, I know some people really hurting, let's have them come in. And without prayer and fasting, this is what happens in most people's attitudes. Suddenly they'll be like, yeah, we helped those people. Had them over our house, had to feed them. They had nothing. But, we have stuff. And so that's how we were able to offer to them, what we have. And you can just feel like there's pride of like, here's us, God's using us, and here's the little peon that we helped. Yeah. Right? And where when God removes that bond of wickedness from our own heart, he evangelizes us, there's a change in attitude that it doesn't matter what a life's situation a person's going through. You realize at any moment you could be in their spot if it wouldn't be for the grace of God. There's just something that your compassion goes out to them, but you realize I'm no better than you in any way. But for the grace of God that he brought me to this point, which causes you to want to evangelize even more. See how that works? You can see how religion runs a fine line right alongside of where God wants to go and makes it look real pretty, but it ends up being judgmental, arrogant, prideful, and the people don't get set free. Well, I had them over. I tried to share the gospel with them. They just didn't listen. Maybe you can work with them. The attitude's all wrong. So the church has to get to a place of prayer and fasting where the bond, the thing where we're prevented from moving, where we're in restraint, that where wickedness has touched our heart and has hardened us in any way and caused us to be in unbelief in any way, that needs to go. And as that leaves, then it's going to cause us to want to share bread of the word and physical bread. And then it's going to cause us to bring people to our house. And we used to bring people to our house, when our kids were little and they didn't know who was all going to show up, right? We had this sunroom, kind of like a back porch type of deal that Vern turned into a sunroom. And I remember having 40 troubled youth. And I say that because a lot of them came out of gangs and different things like that, or were in foster care situation. And we didn't know who else was going to show up. You just made a bunch of turkeys and, whatever the food was and fed them. I tell you, it was fun. It was fun to be able to be in that spot. And then to hear their stories and to realize, wow, where they've come from. Some people have gone through so much. It's like they are soldiers that have come through such bondage and such hurt, and you just can't help but have compassion. But if there's judgmentalness and if there's I'm better than, or if there's any of that kind of stuff with the label of religion over it, it's a time we need to pray and fast. Our hearts have to be changed. And so as the church is praying for revival, prayer and fasting plays hand in hand with this, and to have the attitudes right. So we have like Maddie Montgomery's coming in, and we've got these different events that are coming up. We can look at that as like we have an event, and I hope they do something. I hope those bands really, do it, and we'll applaud, and we'll be like, yep, and we paid for it, and it's going to be good, and put ourselves in a spot where we're really not looking for the move of God to happen through us. The move of God's got, for this to be effective, we are going to have the move of God in us. So any bonds of wickedness, anything where we're restrained or is preventing us to move into the things of the kingdom, I want that gone. I want it gone. And so that's where prayer and fasting comes in. We're getting in close to God. And isn't it amazing, like Friday Night Freedom, for those of you who are here, that even in the quiet times where God's moving, he's speaking to your heart and he's taking off restraints. If you let him, it's just like, oh, it feels good. Get that gone out of me. Speak peace to that area, however, and it leaves. And your perspective on people and life changes just by being in the presence of God. And that's why we have to have that. So then it talks about covering the naked. It says, when you see the naked, that you cover him. Now, the intent there, when you look it up, has several different meanings. You can cover somebody through prayer. You can cover them with clothes. You can cover them in leadership. You can cover them by being family to them. Wherever they're lacking. Wherever they're naked or without. That's the word naked there. It doesn't necessarily mean they're standing there in the buff. They might be, but it doesn't mean that necessarily. It's saying whatever the need is, you're saying, I want to cover that. I want to bless. The blessing only truly flows through us, though, when the bonds of wickedness are out of the way. Because we're free in that area, and that's where the blessing causes prosperity to come to other people. Now, verse 5, or the fifth thing is, don't hide yourself from your own flesh. I had to research that one a little bit, because it's like, up front. But the intent of that is that, when you are around people who need ministry, don't hide from them. If you're around people who maybe make you feel uncomfortable, don't hide from them. Don't back up. Don't go, oh, there they are. I got to go over here. Yeah, you ever just have that time where you just wanted to be by yourself, have a cup of coffee, something like that, and all of a sudden there's a flood, and you're like, oh, come on. I know there's people who have had that kind of time where you're just like, oh, man, I was trying to say, okay, all right. Well, don't hide yourself in that way. But here's the thing, fasting causes you to not want to. It causes you to want to acknowledge what's going on. The other study that was talking about this verse, don't hide yourself from your own flesh, is to be aware of what your fleshly desires are. Don't hide from that. So fasting will cause you to literally just go, that's where my flesh is at. Man. What a corrupt deal that it wants to go down this. I'm not going to hide from that. I'm going to face that. And I want the bonds of wickedness to leave. And it's got to go. So our intent first is that. And remember I said that, there's different types of fasting. The main type of fasting that you will see taught or heard about people fasting is like they'll have a life crisis and they're like, that's it, I'm fasting. I'm going to get that to change. And change can come about, but it's really interesting the more I study it, how much that change happens in our own heart. Yep. And then it happens out here. It's usually not, like I fasted, so there, and then all of a sudden some move happened out here, and then, oh, that changed my heart. I'm changed now because I saw God acknowledge me. Because I fasted and then, he acknowledged me, now I'm changed. No, the heart change comes through the loosing of the bonds of wickedness, the sharing of your bread, bringing to your house the poor, covering, prayer, clothes, leadership, family, all those attitudes. Don't hide yourself from your own flesh. All of that is taking place in the heart. And it brings about change. Now, we talked about last night, just briefly, there's a step that happens for the power of sin and how it gets on us. And that is, first it goes bonds. That's something that binds or restrains to prevent someone from moving. If a bond comes on you, it's all of a sudden you're prevented from moving. If it stays too long, it causes a burden. And when a burden comes on you, that's something that's carried something that's worrisome or oppressive. So it'll go from bonds to burdens. And after burdens, if that stays too long, you will be yoked. And a yoke is a wooden bar or frame or something that causes people to be treated cruelly and unfairly, especially by taking away their freedom. See, so the whole thing that sin is after is taking away movement and freedom from your life. Salvation means to take the limits off and give freedom back, right? That's what Jesus did. He saw that we were yoked, we were burdened, and we had bonds, right? And so then he came and took care of that for us so that that's lifted off of us. And so this is the part that if you identify with any of those words where you feel like, I'm definitely yoked in an area, there's something that I feel like I'm being cruelly treated unfairly, and I feel like my freedom is being taken away in this area. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, no matter what it is, it's like there's a yoke here that's got to go. And I like how it says in verse 6 in the Amplified, it says, and that you break every enslaving yoke. See, so he doesn't even just say yoke. It's the thing that took your freedom away is the thing that made you a slave. See? Fasting is to change that. Prayer and fasting together is to change that. Rarely does it ever say just fasting. This chapter is describing fasting, but whenever you look up fasting other places, most of the time it's prayer and fasting. And they prayed and they fasted and they prayed. Because communion with God and then setting yourself aside for that stronger, clear communion with him is what fasting and prayer does. And so you don't want to be unbalanced where it's like you pray, and you never fast. And on the other hand, it's like, I'm going to get something done and I fasted. And we're pretty good at doing without some things, but we never open our mouth at all and pray. So then, you're getting something done, but not so much. It'd be better if you put the two together, right? So we don't want to go from bonds to burdens to yokes. We want none of those. But I know that in life, we've all been restrained in some way or another. There's areas of oppression or burden or some things that become worrisome to us. I like how it puts that together because it says something worrisome or oppressive. Well, when you study oppression, fear brings oppression. So it would make sense that if you're worrying and have anxiety, it draws the spirit of oppression. That way of thinking, that heaviness. And that's why it becomes such a burden. And then you're yoked. Can't get out. We're yoked and it's like my freedom's gone and now the whole thing is treating me very cruel. That requires prayer and fasting. So he goes through and says, isn't this what fasting really is about? Where they were showing in the beginning part of the chapter, it's like, look at me, I'm fasting, God's got to do something for me. Or look at me, I'm fasting, I want attention, and I really want people to know that I'm holy and that I'm going through this suffering time. And God's got to do something. I mean, hey, I fasted, aren't you going to do something? Those are all wrong attitudes. But he says, isn't it this really is what fasting and prayer is about? Getting rid of the bonds, the burdens, and the yokes. Yeah. And then he goes on, once that attitude is right, verse 8 says, then, so you get this right, you put yourself in the right spot with God and go after this, then shall your light break forth like the morning, and your healing, your restoration, and the power of a new life shall spring forth speedily. Your righteousness, your rightness, your justice, and your right relationship with God shall go before you, conducting you to peace and prosperity, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Ho! And it goes on with even more good stuff, but it's interesting, like that pretty much what I just read said, and then your needs met. It covers it. There's not anything really there that's missing. I mean, the glory of the Lord's our rear guard. Peace and prosperities come on us. We're in right relationship with God. That means there's a flow going on here. I mean, isn't that really what's going to be produced through fasting? If we're fasting and that does not get produced, our attitude is wrong, we don't have the knowledge base to know what we're doing, or fasting for the wrong reason. I mean, there's many different things, but it's not fasting's fault. And I say that because I think what's happened is there's been many people over the years who, that's it, I'm fasting, and then they don't have the experience that they wanted and they quit fasting, which then teaches the next generation under them to quit fasting. And then now it's pretty much like, you fast. I don't even know if we need to do that. Don't we have grace? Yeah, exactly. That's what's being said now. I mean, grace will bring it to you. Yeah. Well, James says that grace flows daily from God to us, but for those who are humble enough to receive it. And last week we learned that in Psalms it said that the fasted attitude is the head to the chest, right? It's the attitude of I'm turning inward to see my own heart. That's humbling ourselves. Well, that means there's probably something that's got to be dealt with. Oh, grace will deal with that. Not until we humble ourselves and acknowledge it. And so this is where prayer and fasting is on the comeback, because it's right in front of revival. And I have been studying on revival, and we'll talk a little bit about this morning during service. But one of the things about revival is each revival that I've gone through was always, what was always in front of it was prayer and fasting. So we are right in the heart of God's thinking. To separate ourselves away, to get the bonds of wickedness to move off of us. We're not fettered in any area. And the burdens, the oppressive, worrisome things, that thing that makes everything feel heavy's got to go. The yokes have got to leave. Anywhere where we're not free, he is freeing us up as a congregation, as a church, as families. And the evangelism that should come out of that should follow. See, it always should follow that. And that's how revival takes place. So I want to encourage you that if you're watching this and are here this morning and you realize that, hey, there's some things in my life that are prevented from moving. I didn't know that I had a bond in that area, that something's fettered it. It bound that. I just thought, hey, well, it's kind of rough life. I thought, hey, that's how it is. Not supposed to be that way. God wants us free. And there may be people watching that are saying, yeah, I am in a worried state. If this thing feels so heavy for me, it feels like it's going to break my back. You're burdened. And there's other people saying, I have both of those. And I also feel like I am yoked to a place that heaviness has come on me and it's preventing me from freedom. And this morning, I just want to mention that this is the time then to turn to God in prayer and fasting. Turn your heart toward him, not in a sorrow of feeling sorry for yourself, and that's why you're going to do without. It's not another beating for you of how I'll just fast and beat myself up even more. No, you're setting yourself aside for God to move, and he will. His promises are true, for he is not a man that he can lie. So begin today asking him, what would you have me to do, Lord? And let fasting renovate your life.